There was once a time, long before the polished roads and license plates, when travel was not so simple and certainly not free. Back in the age of castles and cloaks, when a horse was your steed and boots your most trusted companions, there stood little huts and heavy gates at roadsides, bridges, riverbanks, and even in the middle of dense woods. These were the toll booths of medieval days. Not the beep and go kind we know now, but something older, stranger, and full of stories. The toll booth was a crooked little shack sometimes, made of stone or timber, with moss clinging to its roof and chickens scratching at the doorstep. At other times, it was a proper tower, part of a gatehouse that guarded a bridge or the narrow pass through the hills. Wherever it stood, it always meant one thing. Someone wanted your coin before you could pass. Not because they built the road for your comfort, no, but because they had the power to say stop and the men with swords to make sure you listened. The lords and barons, ever hungry for silver, saw the roads and rivers as streams not just of travelers, but of wealth. Why let merchants cross your bridge for free when you could charge them a fee for the privilege? Why let peasants move carts of turnips through your land without a few pennies for your purse? It became the custom of the land. If you used the path, you paid the price. And so, toll booths bloomed like mushrooms after rain, each a little kingdom unto itself. Now, not all tolls were alike. Some were fair enough, just a coin or two for the upkeep of a good bridge. But others were as greedy as a fat abbot at a harvest feast. There were places where toll keepers counted not just your carts, but the number of wheels, the number of oxen, the weight of your goods, even the shoes on your feet. Imagine that, paying more if your horse had iron shoes, or if your cloak looked too fine. And heaven help you if you were a foreigner or a Jew, for then the toll was often doubled or worse. At river crossings, there were ferrymen who charged by the barrel or by the beast. They pulled ropes, stretched across the water, or rowed creaky flatboats from one bank to the next, grumbling all the while and squinting at your purse. If you tried to cross without paying, you might find yourself halfway across with the boat turned back or the oar pulled in. Or, if you dared to swim, you'd face the river patrol, men with crossbows on the lookout for freeloaders. Some toll booths had scales, large enough to weigh whole carts. Others had ledgers thick with dust, where scribes recorded every passing soul. And some were nothing more than a man with a spear and a mean look, standing by a rope strung across the road. Pay the toll or go the long way, he'd say, and most folks, weary from travel or heavy with goods, would pay. But here's where the tales get richer than a bishop's wine cellar. You see, toll booths weren't just about money. They were crossroads of humanity. All manner of folk passed through. Merchants with silks from Venice, pilgrims on their way to Canterbury, soldiers returning from battle, jugglers, beggars, monks, even spies. The toll keeper heard more gossip than a tavern wench and saw more secrets than a confessor. Sometimes they'd look the other way for the right bribe. Sometimes they'd report what they saw to their lord. And sometimes they'd take what they pleased, especially if you were weak or wandering alone. There were legends, too, of toll keepers who were ghosts, doomed to collect coin for eternity, of bridges that demanded blood instead of silver, of toll roads cursed by witches, where carts turned to stone and oxen wept tears of fire. These were whispered stories, told by firelight to wide-eyed children, but even grown men steered clear of certain tolls after dark. The most feared tolls were the illegal ones, set up by bandits dressed as guards, charging coins with counterfeit authority. Some even built toll booths overnight, collecting fees before the local lord caught wind. By then, they were gone, their coffers full, and their booth left to rot. And in some lawless parts, the toll was your life unless you paid in silver or flesh. Yet there were toll keepers who were fair, even kind. An old woman who let poor pilgrims pass if they shared prayer. A one-eyed man who took only what a traveler could spare and gave bread to children who passed barefoot. These rare souls turned toll booths into way stations of grace, though their stories were often forgotten amidst the louder tales of greed and cruelty. Monasteries, too, sometimes ran tolls. A bridge built by monks might demand coin to keep the stones in place and the poor fed. Pilgrims, especially, paid dearly, one toll after another on the way to the sacred shrines, each booth claiming a part of their penance. And yet, many believed the tolls cleansed them, that the coin given on the road was part of their spiritual journey. It was a strange kind of devotion, offering silver for passage, as if St. Peter himself were manning the booth at Heaven's Gate. Toll roads were not just for people. They saw animals, wagons, herds of sheep, barrels of ale, carts of dung, sacks of flour, looms, coffins, and sometimes even relics of saints. Everything that moved across the land passed under the eyes of the toll keeper. And with every passing came a negotiation, a moment of judgment. What are you worth? What can you pay? Some travelers try to cheat. They'd hide goods beneath hay, disguise themselves in rags, or travel at night to slip by unnoticed. But toll keepers had sharp eyes and sharper ears. They knew every trick and had informants among the townsfolk. If you're caught evading toll, the punishment could be harsh: fines, confiscation, even jail. In some towns, your cart could be seized and your goods sold to cover the fee. The road was not for the poor or the foolish. Knights, however, often passed toll-free. Their title was their passport, and many toll keepers knew better than to stop a man in armor with a sword at his hip. Nobles, too, often had exemptions, or they simply refused to pay. What toll keeper would argue with a lord's banner flying high and a dozen armed men at his back? But merchants paid, and dearly. Their caravans were long, their goods many, and every town demanded its share. Some routes became infamous, known as the Silver Roads, because they drained a man's purse dry before he reached his destination. And yet, the merchants still came. For trade was the lifeblood of the land, and even the greediest toll could not stop the wheels from turning. In time, some towns began to regulate tolls more strictly. They issued charters, marked official toll points, and even printed tokens or papers to show proof of payment. But corruption remained. Toll keepers skimmed from the pot. Lords demanded more, and the people grumbled. It was a system built on the backs of travelers, and those backs grew sore. And yet, for all their troubles, toll booths had a strange charm. They were landmarks, meeting places, stories waiting to happen. Lovers met in secret near the toll bridge. Songs were sung about the cruel gatekeeper or the brave boy who crossed without coin. Some booths had names like the Bleeding Gate or the Hollow Toll, names that passed into legend long after the wood had rotted and the stone had crumbled. Today, those medieval toll booths are mostly gone, swallowed by time. A few survive in old market towns, their stones weathered and their windows blind. You might walk past one and never know what it was. But if you listen closely, in the hush of a quiet morning or the rustle of leaves beside an ancient road, you might still hear the jingle of coin, the creak of a gate, the gruff voice asking, "What's your business, traveler?" And if you pay close attention, you'll see that tolls have not vanished. They've merely changed their dress. We still pay to pass in different ways. The price may not be in silver anymore, but the question remains the same. What will you give to go forward? So the next time you drive down a highway and beep your way through a toll, remember the crooked booths of old. Remember the keeper with the crooked smile and the list of rates nailed to the door. Remember the travelers who paid with coin, with breath, with hope. From the grand tale of human passage, the road has always demanded something in return, and always will. In the winding days of the Middle Ages, when kingdoms were stitched together by muddy roads and crooked bridges, the toll booth rose like a quiet sentry. It did not glitter like the crown, nor command like the sword, but its power lay in the purse. There, on the well-trodden paths between manors and markets, stood wooden shacks or stone archways where toll keepers watched and waited, ready to collect coin or kine from those who passed. This was not mere road maintenance. It was a system of control, a latticework of permissions and payments that stretched across the land like a spider's web. Each booth was a gatekeeper, each toll a reminder. To travel in the medieval world was to pay your way or be turned back. Travelers, whether they were peddlers pushing carts of onions, shepherds driving their flocks, or pilgrims headed to holy shrines, knew the toll booth as a frequent interruption. Lords who owned the land or claimed the rights over certain roads would grant themselves the authority to collect tolls. Sometimes it was sanctioned by the king. Other times it was simply taken. A river crossing, a mountain pass, a bend in the road, all became opportunities to demand tribute. And though the toll might be a single coin or a handful of grain, it represented more than just currency. It symbolized control over movement, dominion over trade, and the ever-watchful eye of authority. Imagine a poor tinker leading a donkey laden with pots. He comes to a toll booth at a bridge, the only crossing for miles. The toll keeper, sitting by a fire in a thatched hut, demands payment not only for the tinker, but also for the donkey and each of the goods carried. The tinker, weary and underfed, counts out what little he has. Perhaps he begs for leniency, offering a spoon instead of a coin. The toll keeper might take it or not. He might invent a new charge, a bridge fee, or a weather tax for passage during rain. There was often no appeal. The toll booth was law unto itself, backed by the Lord's men or the threat of jail or flogging. Merchants, too, faced tolls at every turn. A journey from one town to another might involve crossing half a dozen toll points, each with different rates and customs. Some tolls were seasonal. Others varied based on the goods transported. Wool, wine, salt, spices, each had their own value, and tolls were calculated accordingly. This created a patchwork of expense and regulation that merchants had to memorize or record, much like a sailor learning the moods of the sea. The cost of tolls was factored into the price of goods, shaping the rhythm of commerce and the accessibility of wares. In this way, toll booths were not just financial checkpoints. They were architects of markets, hidden hands adjusting the flow of trade. But not all tolls were paid in coin. In regions where money was scarce, tolls were demanded in kind. A chicken, a measure of barley, a bolt of homespun cloth. These payments, while practical, reinforced a feudal hierarchy. A merchant might bring luxuries, but a peasant with only onions or eggs had little bargaining power. Some toll keepers took advantage, exacting more than their due, fattening their stores while those they taxed grew lean. Corruption was not uncommon. Lord would appoint cronies to collect tolls, who in turn demanded bribes, concocted fictitious tolls, or double-charged travelers unfamiliar with local rules. Complaints might reach the ears of the Lord, but justice was often slow or selective. Still, the toll booth was more than a parasite. In some cases, toll revenue funded the very roads and bridges it taxed. A lord might use tolls to repair a crumbling bridge or clear a dangerous pass. Towns with bustling toll stations might thrive, as the tolls funded markets, fairs, and guards to keep bandits at bay. For these communities, tolls were a bitter necessity, a price paid for safety and infrastructure. And when managed fairly, tolls could bring prosperity. Strategic locations became rich not through conquest, but through collection. However, fairness was rare. More often, tolls were levied with an eye toward personal gain or political assertion. When rival lords clashed, toll booths became battlegrounds of a different kind. One might set a toll to weaken the trade of another, or to punish towns loyal to a rival. Pilgrims heading to a holy site might find their path blocked by tolls so steep they turned back, or risked longer, more dangerous roads to avoid them. In this way, tolls were tools of war and negotiation, not just economics. Monasteries, too, joined the toll game. Though vowed to spiritual poverty, many abbeys sat on valuable land and guarded roads to sacred destinations. Pilgrims brought coins and commerce, and the church was not above profiting from their devotion. A monastery might erect a booth and declare it holy stewardship, charging tolls for the upkeep of the bridge or the safety of the flock. Some funds did go to good works, but others filled the coffers of the already wealthy. There were even cases where the church and local lords feuded over toll rights, sending their representatives to argue in royal courts or clash in the fields. Toll rights were often hereditary, passed from father to son, or sold like land. A lord might grant toll rights to a favored knight as a reward, or a desperate noble might sell them to a merchant guild in need of influence. The toll booth thus became a token of favor, a tool of patronage, and a pawn in larger political games. Some towns banded together to resist tolls, negotiating charters that allowed them to travel toll-free within certain regions. These charters were treasured and fiercely defended, symbols of liberty in a land bound by feudal dues. Yet even with these resistances, the system endured. The travelers still faced the toll booth like a recurring dream, familiar and frustrating. Over time, toll keepers developed reputations. Some are known for kindness, waving through the poor or accepting songs in lieu of coin. Others were feared, cruel with their staff, and quick to raise the bar only for gold. Tales spread in taverns of toll keepers turned bandits, or lords who disguised their greed in the robes of charity. Ballads were sung of clever travelers who tricked or bribed their way through, or of saints who miraculously opened gates without payment. For the average traveler, the toll booth was a fact of life. It stood like a stubborn tree on the road, unmovable and ancient. It shaped how people traveled, where they settled, what goods they bought, and what paths they avoided. And though some complained and cursed, others accepted it as part of the world's order. After all, everything had a price in those days, a price in sweat, in coin, in silence. The toll booth, modest and unassuming, demanded that price. Even as kingdoms changed hands and banners rose and fell, the toll booth remained. It outlived kings and survived plagues. Roads shifted, bridges collapsed, and were rebuilt, but the toll booth endured, always ready to take its due. It was the quiet engine of a medieval economy, a checkpoint of authority, a reminder that freedom of movement was not a right, but a rented privilege. And so, the peasant, the merchant, the minstrel, and the pilgrim alike passed beneath its gaze, leaving behind a coin, a grumble, or a prayer. The booth keeper scribbled in his ledger or marked his stick, the gate lifted, and the traveler moved on, poorer by toll, but richer with the tale of one more passage made through the web of power that stitched the medieval world together. Step lively, traveler, for the road winds long and the stories grow thick like fog over the moors. In the world of yore, where cobblestone paths cut through forests and winding streams whispered secrets to passing hooves, one never quite knew what awaited on the journey ahead. A noble's decree? A band of outlaws? Or more often still, a toll booth, quiet and squat as a hen on her nest, standing in your way not with blade or bow, but with a ledger and a demand. You see, in medieval times, the road was not free, nor was it fair. And depending on the road you took, or the boots you wore, or even the way you looked, your passage through these stone-bound gates could vary as wildly as the weather. No two tolls were ever quite the same. A toll in the Highlands of Scotland was a different beast from one in the Flemish lowlands. Even within a single realm, a toll station might change its mood from year to year, depending on who sat behind the gate, quill in hand and coin in mind. Sometimes it was a lord's steward with cold fingers and a colder heart. Sometimes it was a jolly old man who'd swap a tail for half your copper. But the toll, oh, the toll, it was always there. Not just a price, mind you, but a performance, a negotiation, a game. Let's say you were a peddler, cart creaking under bolts of dyed cloth from the weavers in Ghent. You'd trundle down the trade route, wheels bouncing in and out of ruts worn by the centuries. A sign ahead warns, in crooked Latin, pecunia ad transire, money to pass. You'd stop your mule and curse under your breath, already counting your coin. The booth is no more than a wooden shack, but it's guarded like a fortress, manned by a toll keeper with a sour mouth and a heavy seal of authority. He asks not just what you're hauling, but where you're bound and whether you've paid already down the river bend. Show the wrong permit or forget your merchant stamp, and he'll charge you double, or worse, seize your goods and have you wait while he writes a letter to his lord. But should you be a monk, say from the Benedictine order with a scroll of scripture beneath your arm, your experience would be softer. Not always free, mind you, but often reduced for the toll men respected the cloth, or feared it, or both. Some tolls, especially those run by bishoprics or monasteries themselves, had exemptions for clergy. So while you might still be delayed by a check of your saddlebag or a bit of small talk about God and weather, You'd likely pass with most of your coin intact, and maybe a blessing over your shoulders. Now, if you were a poor farmer heading to market with a few sacks of barley or turnips to trade, your journey was another matter entirely. Toll booths near towns were notorious for squeezing every last copper from rural folk, especially those unlucky enough to live just outside a city's tax boundary. One fellow might be charged for the weight of his cart, another for the number of animals he brought, and yet another for merely stepping on chartered soil. In some places, peasants would tie their goods to poles and carry them on their backs to skirt the wheels tax. Others would detour miles through woods and marshes to avoid a booth altogether. They called it going the low way, though it was often the hard way, and sometimes the dangerous one too. Merchants, on the other hand, learned the art of diplomacy. If they traded often, they'd build relationships with toll keepers, perhaps even slip them a bribe or gift. Fresh cheese, imported spices, a bolt of silk. These gifts smoothed the process. A familiar merchant with a friendly smile and a reputation for fair dealing might glide through a toll with barely a question, while a stranger with no letters of passage would be interrogated until the sun dipped low. But it wasn't always corruption. Sometimes it was just habit, the same way a village dog won't bark at the butcher he sees each morning. And yet, some tolls weren't even about coin. In border regions, tolls often served as political checkpoints. If tensions simmered between realms, say, between the Holy Roman Empire and the French crown, the booth became a place of suspicion. A traveler might be detained, searched, even turned back. Papers were inspected not for taxes, but for alliances. There were stories, whispered in roadside inns, of toll keepers who acted as spies, sending word to lords about who crossed and why. A scholar carrying forbidden texts, a troubadour with more instruments than seemed proper. These were noted and remembered. Sometimes a toll booth was the last thing a wanderer saw before being summoned to explain himself to the local bailiff. Then there were the tolls that traveled. Not all booths were fixed stone or timber. Some tollmen wandered, especially in times of war or famine. A knight might set up an impromptu gate on a bridge and claim toll rights by blade alone. Or a local war band might throw a rope across the road, demanding a security fee to ensure you reach the other side unmolested. In theory, such behavior was criminal, but in practice, it was tolerated, so long as the collectors weren't too greedy and the powerful looked the other way. River tolls told their own tales. The great waterways of Europe, the Rhine, the Danube, the Seine, were dotted with castles perched like vultures above their bends. Each castle claimed a right to charge passing ships, often with little coordination and much confusion. A barge full of grain might pass 5 different tolls in a single day, each demanding their share. Captains kept chests of stamped documents proving they'd already paid upstream, but many toll keepers feigned ignorance or claimed the documents expired at the last bend. Some river traders grew so frustrated they formed leagues, like the Rhine League, to fight the worst toll lords, even besieging castles when diplomacy failed. And what of pilgrims? Holy folk traveling to shrines and relics were often granted special passes. The road to Santiago, for instance, had toll exemptions at certain stretches, but those who walked with limps or bore no obvious signs of piety risked being taken for vagrants or thieves. A Real pilgrim might be charged nothing, a suspected fraud, everything. It all depended on the toll keeper's mood, his own faith, or his suspicion. And sometimes, the coin didn't matter so much as the story. A good tale could win passage. A poor one could cost dearly. Even animals changed the rules. Tollmen counted oxen, pigs, sheep, even dogs in rare cases. Some booths had posted rates. 1 coin for each cart, 2 for each ox. But others were vaguer, and haggling was part of the ritual. A herder with 10 sheep might swear he had only 6, hiding the rest behind a hill. A tollman might prod each animal with a stick and charge double if he thought you were lying. In one tale, a clever shepherd disguised his sheep as dogs to avoid tax, wrapping them in leather scraps and teaching them to bark on command. The tollman laughed so hard he let them pass free. The rules could even vary by season. In times of war, tolls rose sharply, as lords sought coin for soldiers and supplies. In times of plague, tolls might be suspended entirely. No one wanted to touch travelers, let alone count their wares. During festivals, tollmen sometimes waived fees, hoping for blessings or fearing mob wrath. But more often, booths near towns used such events to rake in extra gold. A fair day brought merchants and revelers, and the toll keepers made merry with their ledgers, charging for carts, horses, even for the privilege of passing on foot. Some towns even leased toll booths to local guilds as a form of income, allowing bakers or coopers to run the station in exchange for a cut of the takings. And oh, the injustice of it all. For women, tolls could be doubly cruel. A widow hauling a barrel of ale to sell at market might be charged more simply for traveling without a man. A midwife hurrying to a birth could be stopped, questioned, delayed. Tollmen were rarely trained, often corrupt, and held immense power in the moment. A young woman caught with too many coins might be accused of smuggling. An old one with herbs might be eyed as a witch. Some used charm to pass. Others used silence. All walked the road with care. Children, too, learned the dance. Apprentices sent on errands were often warned, don't talk too much at the toll. Smile, but not too wide. Say you're the son of Master so-and-so, and show them the ring. Tollmen respected guild marks, merchant seals, and noble crests. But lacking those, you had only your wits and luck. Some children became messengers precisely because they knew how to charm tollmen. Small, polite, full of excuses. Others were chosen because they could run fast, in case the toll demanded more than money. And for the thieves, for the smugglers, the poachers, the secret bearers slipping through shadowed roads, the toll booth was a nightmare. Some avoided roads entirely. Others bribed tollmen in advance or wore false symbols of the clergy. Tales abound of secret compartments in wagons, of hidden compartments in boots. In one famous story, a man carried a fortune in jewels sewn into a goose's belly, swearing it was for a feast. The tollman let him through, only to discover the ruse years later when the man returned a wealthy trader. The truth, dear listener, is this. The toll booth was never just a gate on the road. It was a mirror of the world, its injustices, its surprises, its sly dances, and its harsh truths. Rich men passed easier than poor. The clever passed freer than the honest. But sometimes, just sometimes, the road showed mercy. A tollman in a good mood. A storm that washed away the gate. A new decree from the king waiving tolls in celebration of his heir. The road could be cruel, yes, but it could also be kind. So when you next walk a trail or cross a bridge or ride a coach through a quiet valley, remember the tollmen of old. Remember the haggling, the laughter, the fear, the negotiations in morning mist. Remember that in the medieval world, even a walk from one village to the next was a story waiting to unfold, and the toll booth was its turning point. For no two tolls were ever the same, and no two stories either. The booth was a stage, and every traveler an actor, some cautious, some bold, all hoping to pass with their purse intact and their journey unbroken. And so it was in the days of kings and carts, when roads twisted like old songs and tolls were more than just a price. They were the living heart of the journey, in the long and winding paths that stitched the medieval world together, over hills and valleys, through dark forests and bustling towns. There stood, every so often, a little house with crooked beams and a great iron bar across the road. It might have been nothing more than a wooden shack, leaning with age, or a grand stone tower with a narrow slit for watching the road below. This was the toll booth, but it was more than just a place for coins to change hands. It was a stage, a border, a memory, a marker in the traveler's tale. It was where the world paused. Folk knew these places well, and not just for the silver they took. Every toll booth had its own character, its own voice. One might greet you with a grumpy old man, thick-bearded and half asleep, only waking to grunt and shake his purse. Another might be watched over by a woman who knew everyone's business, handing out gossip like change. Some booths stood alone, flanked only by the wind, while others were nestled in little hamlets where inns, smithies, and chapels clustered like birds around seed. But all toll booths shared one thing. They were crossroads not only of land, but of life. They gathered people, traders, pilgrims, soldiers, thieves, and in their gatherings, culture passed hands as much as coin. Travelers came from near and far, and when they arrived at a toll booth, they brought more than goods and wagons. They brought stories. It was at these booths that a tinker from York might meet a cheese seller from Normandy, where a monk bound for Rome might speak with a wool merchant heading to Bruges. And between them flowed more than greetings. Tales were traded like buttons and boiled eggs, of strange beasts in the forest, of new taxes in distant towns, of uprisings, and of miracles. Some tales were true. Others were embroidered over the years like an old cloak passed through too many hands. But they made the booth more than just a barrier. They made it a hearthstone of the road. In the evening, when traffic slowed and shadows stretched, toll keepers often lit a fire, and the travelers who lingered too long or arrived too late gathered around it. The toll booth became a place of sharing, not just of silver, but of warmth and company. Out came flasks and crusts of bread. Someone would sing. Someone would swear. A fiddle might appear if luck favored, or a drum. Children would laugh and point at strange wagons, marveling at the painted horses or caged animals some traders dragged behind them. And the toll booth, once a place of tax and tedium, bloomed into something richer. It became a node of connection, a place where folk were reminded they weren't alone on the road. There was, too, the unspoken ritual of bargaining. Toll amounts could vary, and not just by distance or cargo. They could change with weather, mood, rumor. And so the toll booth became a theater of negotiation. A traveling actor might perform a quick scene to charm the toll keeper. A merchant might inflate his hardship to gain pity. A noble might scowl and throw down coin with disdain, while a peasant might offer eggs or fish if coin were short. Toll keepers learned quickly to read character, and some were known as master hagglers, turning the toll booth into a game of wits. Over time, this dance of give and take became its own kind of art, a folk diplomacy played out on dirt roads and cobbled bridges. The toll booth also bore witness to change. During feast days or royal visits, traffic swelled, and the booth buzzed like a festival. Flags flew, musicians played, traveling barbers and puppeteers stopped by, turning the area into a makeshift fairground. On other days, after war or plague, the booth might fall eerily quiet, its keepers staring down an empty road, listening to crows. Through it all, it endured, a steady drumbeat of life pulsing through the chaos of history. And when times were hard, it was often the toll booth that kept folk tethered to normalcy, marking the passage of time with its steady rhythm of arrivals and departures. Some toll booths even became famed in songs and poems. Ballads told of toll keepers who fell in love with passing maidens, or outlaws who tricked their way past the bar. There was the tale of Old Will O' the Ford, a tollman who was said to be part ghost and part man, collecting coin with a skeletal hand and whispering riddles to travelers. Or the story of the singing toll gate near Durham, where the keeper's daughter had a voice so sweet, it was said men would pay double just to hear her sing. These stories, passed from village to village, gave toll booths a place not just in the roads of the realm, but in its imagination. Booths also marked the edges of power. Crossing one often meant entering a new jurisdiction, a new lord's domain, a bishop's lands, or the reach of a chartered city. With this came changes in law, language, even measurement. A mile might stretch differently across boundaries. A coin might hold different worth. The toll booth thus served as a cultural translator. The keeper might warn you, careful past this point. His lordship frowns on loudmouths, or in the next town, they don't drink ale after dark. In this way, toll booths helped travelers navigate not just geography, but custom. They were guides, gatekeepers, and sometimes guardians. They also reflected the tensions of the times. During periods of unrest, booths were sometimes attacked, burned, or abandoned. A toll booth might be the first to fall in a peasant revolt, a symbol of oppression to those tired of paying their way through life. But it might also be the last refuge in times of danger. When the roads turned unsafe, A toll booth with strong doors and a watchful keeper became a haven, a beacon of safety. Some toll keepers took this duty seriously, keeping logs of who passed, offering shelter, warning of bandits or wolves. They were not just collectors, they were custodians of the road. In towns and cities, toll booths were often larger, grander affairs, arched gateways or towers built into the walls. Here, the cultural function was magnified. Travelers lined up, told their business, displayed wares. Guilds posted notices. Heralds announced news. Troubadours sang songs to lighten the wait. It was not just passage being paid for. It was entry into a different world. The toll booth was a checkpoint of transformation, where dusty travelers became city folk, where the road-weary entered a place of order and spectacle. Just beyond the booth lay the market square, the cathedral, the court, and all the promise and peril they brought. For the toll keeper, life was a strange blend of solitude and society. Alone much of the time, yet always visited, rooted in one place, yet connected to the wide world. A toll keeper might know more of the realm's mood than a noble in a keep. They heard rumors before they became news. They saw the rise of trade, the movement of armies, the patterns of pilgrimage. They knew when apples ripened in Kent, when snow fell in the north, when the roads to France were safe again. And they passed this knowledge on to the tired, the curious, the desperate. Children, too, made memories at toll booths. For them, the bar across the road was a kind of magic. It could stop wagons and horses with a single gesture. It made grown men plead and joke. To a child, the toll booth was a place of mystery, where people from far-off lands paused, spoke in strange tongues, and sometimes handed out sweets or odd trinkets. For those growing up near one, the toll booth was a window into the wider world, a place to dream of travel, of adventure, of stories yet lived. And so, in this way, toll booths became more than waypoints. They became mirrors of the time, repositories of memory, filters through which the medieval world passed and changed. A humble booth in the woods might bear witness to 1,000 lives, 1,000 crossings, each with its own weight. Lovers parted there. Merchants argued. Horses died. Coins changed hands. And sometimes so did secrets. There were booths that stood for centuries, their beams darkened with age, their stones worn by generations of feet and hooves. Local children would carve initials into them. Old women would leave offerings out of custom or superstition. They stood through wars, watched empires rise and fall. Some were abandoned, swallowed by ivy and moss, forgotten by maps, but remembered in songs. Others evolved into inns, bridges, or even entire villages, growing like mushrooms from the foot of a tree. In the end, every toll booth told its own tale, and together they formed a kind of oral cartography, an unofficial map of the medieval world, marked not by borders but by stories. To cross a toll was to cross into a new moment, a new connection, a new version of yourself. Whether you were a knight or a potter, a bard or a widow, the toll booth asked of you the same question: who are you, and where are you going? And the beauty of it was that the answer was never quite the same, because at that humble gate, where would met road and silver met hand, something happened. A meeting, a pause, a moment remembered. And in that moment, the toll booth, so easily dismissed as a nuisance or a tax, became something else. A touch point, a fire in the dark, a place where the road spoke back.